A budget is telling where the money needs to go instead of wondering where it went. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Tonight, our topic of discussion is Budget 2017. Will the Budget 2017 make sure that you at home will get rich, or does it mean that you will have to spend your money and not have anything by the end of the year? Where is the country's economy really heading? 2017 budget. Is the government having its priorities right? Is the government moving forward, trying to achieve its budget deficit of 4.7%? To discuss all this and more, we have with us four eminent personalities in the studio with us today. Also joining us this evening is Shiran Fernando, Lead Economist, Frontier Research. Nice to have you on board as well for the first time, Shiran.
Good evening.
And young Sri Lanka. And now move my attention to Shiran Fernando, Lead Economist, Frontier Research. Shiran, first time on the show. Is there a problem with the country's economy? Is it good? Is it bad? Or is it really worse? Your time starts now.
I think the worst is sort of, if you could say, behind us. If you look in a very optimistic sense of the word. 2015, you had a sort of a democratic election transition cycle. So that sort of, the politics sort of dominated probably the economics of things. So 2016 was more of a stabilization year, where in the end the government needed to go to the IMF and get this reform package on play. So 2017, 18, I mean, are the key years to get some of the reforms done. Not maybe get it done 100%, but if you at least get about 50% of the done, in particular on the tax side, because you started by saying, you know, is your revenue being used properly? Is your taxes at work, basically? But since 1988 or 87, our revenue has not been able to, you know, keep up even with our current expenditure, let alone the public expenditure. So we've not had a revenue surplus or deficit, if I were to put it that way. So the next few years are crucial in terms of, you know, getting some of these structural reforms done to stabilize the economy and then move it forward, I think.
Shay, you said something very interesting. You said that we've put the past worst behind us. However, taking a look at the recent statements being made by high-ranking officials of the government, does that give you an amber light as far as investor confidence is concerned? Do you think the investors are now fearing to invest in Sri Lanka, thinking whether the government has suddenly taken a U-turn? What's your take on this?
It's difficult to judge here what different, you know, government officials say. An investment is a thing where you get a lot of mixed signal. But from a foreign investor perspective, I think a lot of them are very optimistic. I just returned last week from meeting several investors, and a lot of them see, a lot of them also echo the sentiment that, you know, the economy has gone through this transition, is shifting towards a more positive rebalance, and you know, somewhat echoing the right things continuously. So I would sort of, you know, get back this investment mold back into play, because in the past, the fiscal side of things also has been driven a lot by what's gone on in terms of debt and a lot of the public infrastructure projects, and that being, you know, debt driven. So the investment side of things, if it's driven more by FDI, and that really requires investor sentiment to improve. So
now, Sharon, you said that following the 8th of January 2015 polls in Sri Lanka, investor confidence have increased. Where is the FDI we are supposed to see during the last 1.5 years?
Well, it's definitely not come as it should have. I think it's partly to do with the economy, in terms of a lot of people were sort of factoring a bit of a depreciation in as well. So investors generally come in after the economy stabilizes. They don't want to take a depreciation hit once the investment is done. And also, I mean, things like the taxes, what do they get? What are their incentives, which is not clear.
So you're saying, in other words, that the economy is not stabilized yet? We have problems with the country's economy.
Not as yet, but it's sort of heading in that direction, and that's where the budget is sort of crucial to kick it into that gear.
Shiran, do you think that Sri Lanka is resorting to its tea and apparel sector and the traditional exports? Do you think we are running the risk of being orthodox in our approach, or do you think that we need to diversify, or is it already being done?
So in terms of the manufacturing and what you can export in the traditional sense, yes, I think if you look at it, it's like a company that's has 2 or 3 products and 2 or 3 markets or 2 to 5 markets, and it's suddenly not doing too well. So you haven't diversified enough, and you're going to take a hit. But if you look at the services side, I think if you look at in that aspect, we are sort of diversifying, getting more KPOs into the country. There is a lot of interest in that. So if you look at in that perspective, we are sort of improving, and also what's happening with the tourism industry, the organic growth that you're seeing within the industry, both in the formal sector as well as the informal sector. So that is sort of cushioning the lack of growth that we're seeing in the traditional exports.
Finally, Shiran, before we move on to the next one, I also want to ask you, what specifically would you like to see in this budget in order to improve Sri Lanka's standing in terms of the ease of doing business?
So in terms of that, I think the main thing is not to hurt investor sentiment or business sentiment, because in the previous budgets, especially the one with the super gains tax, it caught a lot of businesses off guard. It did not help the investment climate. So avoid things that will take a step back rather than take at least one step forward. And of course, things like the SME things that Anushka highlighted, in that sort of thing, and also things like taxes, improving tax administration, things like that, which previously sort of have brought down our rankings. And the other thing, I guess, for the success of the budget, and even in terms of improving the business rankings, is the execution of some of the policies.
Shiran, the government imposed a super gain tax. Did companies really pay this tax in question?
Yes, they have.
Thank you very much. I'll move our attention to Shiran Fernando, Lead Economist, Frontier Research. Shiran, because you were comparing the previous regime to now and how things have worked out quite well for the government in terms of attracting the international community, my question to you is very simple. The previous regime said that they consider the private sector to be the engine of growth. However, this did not materialize. 2015, the first budget presented by Finance Minister Ravi Karunayaka was viewed as a vengeful budget. 2017 budget, what exactly would happen? Do you think that the private sector will get an opportunity to exploit the Sri Lankan market, to move forward, invest in Sri Lanka, give an opportunity to people out there, and ensure that the unemployment rate goes down? Or will it again be a vengeful budget, as we saw in 2015? Your time starts now.
So I don't have a crystal ball in front of me to sort of give you the...
I can give you some predictions if you want to.
the yes or no answer to that, but I think you can't... you've gone... the 2015 budget sort of was a low in terms of the sentiment and the impacts that some of the policies sort of took place. So it's difficult to see that stick sort of being used in future budgets as well, in particular with the IMF on board. I think the private sector is not looking, I think, for special favors or anything like that. But the private sector is looking for, and for it to be the engine of growth, is for the government to take off some of the low-hanging fruits. Cut the bureaucracy and the red tape when it comes to exports. Set in place, a BOI or a one-stop shop or a one access route for FDI. Set those in place and let the private sector run with it. Because right now, it's the private sector trying to advise the government to sort of fix it up and then trying to run with it, which is not entirely working right now, because the government has a lot of, is looking at several different things. So I think they need to focus on a few low-hanging fruits, and once they sort of put that in place, put the focus on achieving these low-hanging fruits, the private sector will run with it. And it's not only the budget that's really required to run with it. I think budget is a statement of sentiment and a policy statement for the private sector to sort of take it forward. But beyond that, the implementation and getting these structures in place
Bad planning at the start. That is what Anushka Vijayasinghe has said about introducing supplementary budget estimates. Do you think that the government is on the wrong footing overall? They got the wrong start?
In 2015 or?
2015, yes, you're right.
So I mean, if you look at the politics of the thing, they were looking ahead of the parliamentary election. So they were, you know, aiming to sort of be re-elected in that sense, though it was a presidential election. So it was difficult to see maybe if, you know, revenue measures that were expenditure that was supposed to, you know, reduce. But what you didn't sort of expect was things like super gains taxes and things like that to sort of be in the basket, so sort of go against what traditionally what people or the private sector thought of this government when they came in.
Shiran, just prior to the presidential elections on the 8th of January 2015, because you are drawing a parallel between what happened before and what happened now afterwards, many individuals in the opposition then, now in government, said that Sri Lanka is a debt-ridden nation. There is millions of dollars to pay, billions of dollars to pay in debt. However, several months after the present regime took over, following the 17th of August elections, they don't even know the numbers. Can this really happen? Or are they misleading the public again? They said, we don't know what the figures are. It's so much, they hid it from us. Can that happen in a country's economy?
Whether it's, I think, 76% of GDP or 80% or 90%, you can debate that, but the fact is it's still high. Compared to the revenue that we are earning, compared to the exports that we're this thing, it's not a sustainable model.
Okay, can you buy the fact that the present regime did not know how much debt they had to pay?
I mean,
in economic perspective, you're an economist.
So there is a lot of, for example, you know, off-sheet balancing that goes on even within the budgets in terms of the treasury, the state guarantees that come on these some of these loans. So some of them even don't come onto the fiscal deficit. It's off the books because it's state guarantee and you expect the loans to continue. So a mixture of those would obviously add to the loans, and it doesn't give you when you look at the true picture, if it's 76% of debt, it doesn't give you the true picture of things. So if you look at some of the off-sheet balance arguments, I think...
So this government cannot be blamed fully to the mess that we are in right now?
It's difficult to blame, you know, one or the other government. I think for a consistent from successive governments, I think policy has sort of led to this juncture.
Thank you. Research. Shiran, given the current statement that it was made by the finance minister, reducing the fiscal deficit to 4.7, will the people have to bear the brunt of all this? Will they have money by the end of 2017? The time starts now.
If the people, you know, in terms of I think if you look at the number 4.7%, it's not that number particular which matters. I think it's more of how much is actually revenue growing, what the top line growth is on revenue. Then what matters to the people is in terms of the current expenditure, things like on subsidies, on wages, interest payments, things like that, and also the public expenditure, healthcare, education, things like that. So in the past, to get to these numbers, even 2011, when when the deficit was actually coming down, yes, there was a sort of a slowdown in current expenditure, but public expenditure is also slashed to get to these deficits, and you didn't see revenue actually growing. So it was actually sort of tightening that helped us achieve these deficit targets when we were in the early IMF program. So, and the IMF, for example, recognizes this in the current program. They've said, you know, in the past, this is exactly what you've done to get your targets. But what matters this time, and what sort of would maybe not tighten the masses' purses or, you know, belts too much, is if revenue grows and more revenue comes from direct taxes, because right now you're having an imbalance between direct and indirect, then you won't have much tightening. You'll have more expenditure on things like education, things like healthcare, and the situation will improve. So you won't really see a crunch per se, and you will achieve your targets.
Shiran, when you really look at the country's economy and the numbers that we're talking about, the cost of living stats on a single digit right now. However, when you go out there and start spending money, you don't have any saving at the end of the day. The cost of living has just gone up. Numbers, does it really reflect the people's pockets at the moment? 2017, what can we expect?
Listen, if you look at the official index, which is the Colombo Consumer Price Index, it's based on a 2006 basket. Pre 2009, consumption patterns have changed, things like that have changed. Even expenditure, what we exactly spend on food items per se have dramatically changed. So it's not really reflective. So if, for example, the September number is 4%, it's not a real reflection of what's going on. But it's not like in the past where it's been above 10% an inflation rate. So we're not growing, or prices aren't growing at that alarming rates. But yes, I mean, you do get with the VAT increases, with certain businesses not being regulated or made to book in terms of taxes and things like that. The consumer does bear the brunt of what goes on in the economy, the fallouts, and therefore when you go to your retail store or your SME shop or whatever, you start to pay more, and that's why possibly you're spending more than the inflation rate.
Thank you.